The Toronto condo market has turned into a nightmare. Buyers who thought they were investing for their future are now being sued by developers, some even pushed into bankruptcy. Here's what's really happening and what you need to know if you have a pre-construction condo closing in the near future. Hi, my name is Zen. If you enjoy my data-driven and number-crunching real estate updates, be sure to like and subscribe. So this other new hit piece from McLean's is claiming the condo crash and how the big city condo flipping frenzy kind of got completely out of hand. And as with most longer pieces, there's always usually some person at the center of it. But the challenge and the update in this one is how they're now talking about bankruptcy and how if a judgment is rendered against this person that's in this article, they will be forced to file for bankruptcy. So for context, what's basically happening is there have been litigations for a lot of these buyers who are not closing on their pre-construction. And one of the builders, CentreCourt, is actually making an example out of this person potentially. And now if a judgment is rendered, meaning they lose their litigation and they have substantiated damages, meaning the builder, CentreCourt, has sold it for less than whatever it is, plus all the damages they tack on, that, call it multiple six-figure amount of money that the buyer owes to CentreCourt as the builder in this article will force them into bankruptcy. And one of the consequences of bankruptcy is basically costing them really bad credit for the next 7 years of their lives, such that they can't get credit financing, which includes car, homes, or like even online purchases because they can't get a credit card. So this story has been progressing, and at the heart of the article, they're centering it around this one person, Nazir Tajin. I'm sorry if I pronounced her name incorrectly, but when I read that it was like a 41-year-old Montrealer, I'm like, I feel like I've talked about this before, and it actually is the exact same person who is being sued for $860,000 on this, and they sounds like they're going around making the rounds in the media outlines, and they become just the center point of like these articles where things aren't looking great for the pre-construction condo market, because the condo market on the real estate side is actually getting slightly better, tiniest of a bit. People are coming back. So one of the things that I always like to point out is like, what was the purpose of this person buying this condo, this pre-construction condo? And when I read that, hey, they would never be able to be approved for such a steep mortgage, it tells me, I'm like, well, why did you buy it in the first place? And how did you pass the mortgage qualifications, right? But because they cannot sell this property, now they're forced to close and they don't even have any means of actually closing. And that's kind of why we're getting into this bankruptcy kind of situation. And the reason why this story is coming closer and closer is that CentreCourt has been known to build very, very fast. It's a good thing because they can put the money in, there's a lot less delays, and they don't have to pay as much holding costs for interest. And it's been generally great in upwards market where people can move their money from one project to the next and keep rolling it over. However, in a market where things are slowing and people want more time, hoping that the market will recover, this actually is a detriment. So you can see over here where it says, as the closing date is near, this is basically the Forest Hill condo. But as it got closer and closer, he knew that he wasn't going to be able to sell this property because the market hasn't rebounded, which basically forced him to default on this. So now that the entire building has closed, and because there is a realization of damages, meaning if this person bought it for your $855,000 and say CentreCourt sold the unit for $420,000, so we do the math here, $855,000 minus $420,000. Wow, they really sold that very fast at $1,000 a foot. I would say that's actually kind of a deal. So there's $435,000 of damages. That is more than a 50% loss in what they bought it for. So it's a huge problem. So when you tack on all the legal fees and the interest for all of this, it's going to be $435,000 plus more money that this pre-construction buyer owes to CentreCourt. And there have been past precedents where basically if you sign a contract, and I've said this many times before, you owe them that money. And now that damage has been realized, I really think CentreCourt's trying to escalate and push this as fast as possible to set a point so that for any future projects that are closing for pre-construction, this is the example everyone's going to be referencing. So it's very unfortunate that this person is being made an example of. The other thing that I want to bring your attention to is that this article is saying that there's an attitude by policymakers, so like people in power or government, that allow this to spiral out of control. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that how the economics of selling pre-construction actually works, because it made the most sense for developers to sell condos because it allowed them to use the deposits provided by the buyers as part of like down payment and deposit to go and get construction financing to build these things, which ultimately meant that developers had less skin in the game. So when you create this incentive structure for a lot of these developers, and that's mainly because of actually the big banks, they thought it was safer to have a lot of buyers committed to this project, which generally are investors, as opposed to having some large institutional person coming with lots of money, or they build something where end users do want to buy, but it's a lot more capital commitment to build, say, like Manhattan or any part of the world, which actually makes the most sense for building large towers like this that take a long time. However, when our banking system allows developers to use the buyer's deposit and forces the tower to be sold up to like 75% before they fund the construction, that's where the incentive is pushing for a lot of condos. And this is where I actually think policymakers would have made a mistake, and they probably reacted too slowly. And this is exactly why this article is saying selling units upfront allowed developers to quickly recover costs and free up capital for new projects. Another point they were comparing right here is that the units constructed in Toronto before 1990s had a medium size of 1,000 square feet, which is very, very comfortable if you ask me, which is comparable to like a small house, because your 3-bedroom entry-level home on 2 floors in like, old Toronto, that's 100-year-old, is like 1,200 square feet, give or take. So they're saying that the square footage have consistently shrank. And you really have to think about the incentive structure, because you have to ask, who actually buys pre-construction? Over time, as things have gone more expensive, investors have piled in because they've made money as the condo market has appreciated. And pre-construction contracts are basically saying that, hey, I will buy this contract because I think the condo is going to be worth less than what it's going to be by the time it completes. So it's an option. And because of that kind of structure and the way you're allowed to assign it, which really only started in about 2016 or so, more and more investors got in, and more investors just wanted to make money. And then the builders eventually kept trying to sell to more and more investors as costs got ballooned up. Because when I talked to investors way back before, they don't really care about what the unit size is. They come in thinking of the budget, call it the most common one, 500,000. What can I get for 500,000? And when things were like $800 a square foot, you could buy something that's like 600 square feet. When things were like $1,000 a foot, you get 500 square feet as a 1-bedroom. And when things got out of hand, like 1,100 and 1,200 square feet, things got smaller and smaller, where you're basically getting a bachelor's unit or like a very small junior 1-bedroom at like 440 square feet. So a lot of these square footage have shrunk because the investors wanted that price, because as inflation on construction materials and land costs got up, the way you would get construction financing at these banks is still to ultimately sell it very fast. You need 70%. So when you read headlines of the condo crash without reading this 10-minute article, people won't have the context as to what's happening. And for that reason, I think the condo market is not going to be improving anytime soon. And this is exactly what I talk about in this video, where generally Toronto prices are being dragged down by a lot of condos, and we continue seeing prices come down. And yes, sales are picking up slowly right now, but prices have been coming down for the last 6 months on a year-over-year basis. So I foresee seeing this trend continue, and this is what I talk about in this video. So if you want to understand more about that, click on the video that's on the screen right now. Until next time, your move, your future. See ya!